And a lot of things we can expect will also happen. And part of why you come to Hard Facts is so that you can have the context, right? For some of these things, and for some of these events behind the headlines, right? So, our big hard fact today is that Stears has published a special report titled Nigeria in 2023. Stears is joining me to talk about that report. My guest is a senior development analyst at Stears. She co-wrote the Nigeria in 2023 report. Gbemisola Alonge, good to have you on the show.
Hi, Sandra. Thanks for having me.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Good to be speaking to you.
Yeah, good to be speaking to you as well. Lagos, let's also hear from you. What do you think the big stories, events, or issues of 2023 will be? I feel like a lot of people will call me and say, oh, Sandra, definitely the elections. Gbemisola, for the report, you wrote an article called What Will Drive Nigeria's Inflation in 2023. So let me ask you, what will drive Nigeria's inflation in 2023? What are the major factors?
Well, I guess we'll start from what typically drives Nigeria's inflation. So first thing is, inflation is always driven by food inflation. So prices of food, like once there's a spike, food inflation, in food inflation, the rest of inflation basically follows. And that's because, the majority of Nigerians spend a significant chunk of their income on food. So there's that. There's also expectations. So when people assume that there's going to be a hike in prices, they basically start to react. So businesses, when they expect, prices to increase, they already increase their prices just to basically shield themselves from the impact of such price increases. Another thing is policies. So far in the past year or so, Nigeria's inflation has mostly been driven by, policies like the CBN's Ways and Means Finance into the federal government, which basically pumps in money into the economy, and some other like fiscal policies that are basically pushing a lot of money into the economy, some or even just create scarcity. So an example would be the border closures in 2019. When that happened, that caused an increase in prices of food, which then caused like the full inflation. Also, so that's the typical driver, that those will not change this year. Food prices, apart from the seasonal changes, if there's still like situations like structural challenges, like the cost of moving goods, moving food across the country, if that increases, it would also affect the price of food. Another thing is the foreign inflation. So foreign inflation, that influences us as well, because there's the imported inflation, there is the possibility of a recession. There's just several things along those lines. Finally, a recession. There's the possibility of a recession, and that's because in the last year, central banks have been trying to fight inflation. We would have heard of the U.S. Fed, that's the central bank of the U.S., has been increasing interest rates just to fight inflation and to bring it down. Also in the U.K., the Bank of England has been increasing prices. In Nigeria as well, they've been increasing interest rates. So many of the central banks across the world have been trying to fight inflation. And as a result of these interest rates increases or interest rate hikes, right, this could push the economy into a recession. Also, we're seeing situations where, China might, as a result, they just reopened their economy, but if the threat of COVID in that country continues to increase, there's a possibility that they would need to go on a lockdown again. If that happens, the entire world might go into a recession. When recessions happen, we experience low oil prices, low dollars. Low oil prices mean low dollars for us, and that means, an even worse inflation as a result of the scarcity of dollars. So these are just the different things that could, push our inflation, or at least influence our inflation in 2023. Finally, obviously, the elephant in the room, elections. Obviously, there's a lot of money going into campaigning, and that's, first this month and the beginning of next month, that would continue. So yes, that's bound to also influence inflation.
Okay, so we know the factors. Now let's look at let's look at the outlook. Let's talk about the outlook, right? What will it look like this year? Inflation, will it speed up? Will it slow down?
So I mean, largely, I'm not soothsayer or anything, but largely, we expect it to continue to rise. I mean, if we look at the expectation by the World Bank and the IMF, they all expect it to rise, steadily, and then start to reduce in 2023. In Nigeria, for instance, I expect inflation to actually increase, considering that the government plans to phase out, or at least start the phasing out of the fuel subsidy by June or July. So if that happens, obviously there's going to be an increase in fuel prices, petrol prices especially, and that would generally influence everything. It would have a multiplier effect on cost of food, cost of transportation, so many things apart from the actual cost of these fuels. So, I mean, there's also that, basically lingering. But beyond all those things, right, there's the general, situation with food, right? The transportation of food is always very expensive. I don't know if you've seen recently, there's been some people have been like, I think I saw a video yesterday on Twitter about the number of permits that a food transporter needed for one community in Ondo State. There are at least 12 permits. And this is just in one community, in one state, right? People moving things from Lagos to Kano, which is the typical corridor for transportation of food in Nigeria, would have to, get similar permits for several communities. And these permits are not just papers. They come with like paying dues, paying taxes. In 2020, we saw the food producers and marketers of Nigeria. I think I can't remember exactly what that association is called, but there was like a strike of some sort where they refused to send down food. And their reason, although there were like several people assume that there were other reasons, but the reason at the time was just the high informal taxation that they had to face. And it's not new, right? Moving anything across Nigeria requires paying these permits and paying so many other informal taxes to community people, just anybody that, accosts you on the road and things like that. There are very limited options as well. Like, not many people are moving food across, across the country via trains. Not many people move food across the country via airlines as well. So these are just the different situations and different limitations that may just also influence inflation in the long run.
In your report, you talked about the effects of American monetary policy on Nigerian inflation. I found that interesting. Can you break that down for us?
Okay. So, I mean, the U.S. Fed, right? They are the central bank for America, and they've been trying to push down inflation in America for a while now, because I mean, America is currently experiencing inflation rates that are like 40-year highs. So they have an inflation rate that they've never seen in the last 40 years, right? And obviously, the U.S. government or the U.S. Fed prints the dollar, right? So most countries like Nigeria that sort of benchmark their currency against the dollar have to influence or mirror the monetary moves that the US makes. So what that basically means is if the US decides to increase its rates or increase its interest rates this year or today, because Nigeria sort of benchmarks, what I mean by benchmarking is the central bank does a managed float system. So it's basically chooses how much to charge as its official exchange rate based on like what's available and just other factors. So when the interest rates in those countries, when the interest rates increases in the US, it's also expected that Nigeria increases its interest rates as well because of that benchmark. But apart from that, there's a cost of investment, right? So people who want to come and invest in, or investors or large investors who bring money into Nigeria through foreign direct investment or foreign portfolio investments, typically you do so by either first borrowing the money in the US and then bringing it, or borrowing in like other countries and then bringing that money to a country like Nigeria, where they feel like the returns on their investments would be enough to make up for, you know, the cost of borrowing abroad as well. So basically, if you're borrowing at maybe 5% in the US, and this is all hypothetical, if you bring your money into Nigeria, you are expecting to get more than 5%. So if you're getting 15%, then your real, you know, return is actually 10% because of the initial 5% that you borrowed at. But if the US interest rate is increasing and Nigeria's is not, right, then there is that. I mean, the investors are losing out, right? So that's that. That's one of the reasons why we have to mirror like the monetary policy. So if America's inflation continues to increase, right, Nigeria would also feel the impact because of the influence on the foreign exchange, and also because of the cost of investment. Where there is no investment, businesses aren't growing as they used to, and they would need to find another way to sort of make up for their make their profits or whatever, and that might require, you know, increasing prices and some other things. Also, when if the interest rate continues to increase, the value of the dollar continues to increase as well, and that influences, you know, obviously exchange rates and, you know, so many other things. So yeah, I mean, there's always that relationship, and it's a bit complex. So I hope I explained it as simple as possible.
I think you did a good enough job, but Lagos will have to let us know. Lagos, don't forget you can join the conversation 0700 993 993 993 01465 7190. Okay. You talked about the CBN's policies. Right now, the Ways and Means advances are dominating the news. Is it accurate to say that the CBN created and printed this 20 trillion naira plus for the federal government? Is it accurate to say that?
Well, the CBN actually print it in actual raw cash to give the federal government. But the CBN indeed gave the federal government 23 trillion naira. And basically, that's just basically transferring money to the federal government to use. So basically what happens whenever the government sets a budget or creates a budget is there is usually like an expectation of how much they plan to earn and an expectation of how much they plan to spend. Before passing the budget, the gap between how much they plan to earn and spend, the deficit, is usually funded. So the government or the Minister of Finance and Budget Office, they include how they plan to fund this deficit. You know, so they'll say things like, oh, they plan to borrow locally from investors, or they plan to borrow from foreign investors or from multilateral organizations like the World Bank or IMF and all that. But there are situations where even that revenue expectation is not met, right? So, or situations where they thought they could borrow, but they realized when it was time to borrow that, you know, it wasn't possible. An example is last year. So the government attempted or had put in the budget that they would borrow 2.5 trillion naira from foreign sources, but they were unable to even borrow up to 1.5 trillion. I don't even think they borrowed up to 1 trillion naira. And that's largely because, I mean, foreign sources were not exactly very favorable. The prices, you know, the interest rate was just so high. It was higher than, larger sums that we had received years before. So, and that just basically pointed to the fact that investors were not very confident in the Nigerian government's, fiscal situation to borrow them enough money. So what we then saw is, because of that, right, the federal government then had to fall back on the CBN. And I mean, I guess the CBN, according to reports, CBN lent the federal government over 6 trillion last year. So this year, right, so that's basically like some of the ways that the CBN has, you know, funded the federal government. That has influenced inflation. Imagine if you're increasing interest rates and that's preventing businesses from borrowing as much as they should, yet you are giving the federal government money to plug back into the economy and even fuel the inflation more. It's almost like you're doing the exact opposite, and you're countering what the policies that you're making with this backdoor method with the federal government. So that's exactly what was happening, or that's what has been happening for the last 7 years.
Lagos, join the conversation. 0700-993-993-993. Do you have questions or comments for Gbemisola on inflation in 2023? What do you think the big stories or events or issues of 2023 will be? You can share your thoughts with us over WhatsApp as well. WhatsApp is 080-959-75805. If you're abroad, of course, join us over Skype. Skype is Nigeria Info FM. 99.3, hello.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening. What's your name, sir?
Yeah, this is Emmanuel calling from Kirikiri Town.
Welcome, Emmanuel from Kirikiri Town.
Yeah, based on this discussion I just had, the discussion is wow. Come on.
Okay.
That means in our currency now, we are going to have it very hot if the system continues to boil up like this.
Yes.
Using the American standard to checkmate our own currency.
Yes.
It's not helping us.
Okay.
Because anytime you want to buy something, they'll tell you dollar don't high. Automatically, what you used to buy for 100 naira, you go to buy for 5,000. Is there any way we can change the system?
Is there a way to change this system? Gbemisola is there.
So across the world, right, Nigeria is not the only country that mirrors what the US does. That's because, apart from the benchmarking of our currency to the dollar, there's also this issue that the dollar is actually like the most traded currency for the currency used most for trade. So if you're doing like any international business or anything, you typically your transaction will typically be denominated in the dollar. But then one thing that we can do is free the peg, right? So the central bank currently sort of does a managed float system where they don't peg the naira against the dollar exactly, but they sort of do. So that's why our official exchange rate is very different from black market rates. So one thing they can do is allow the official rate to reflect the actual demand and supply of dollars into the country. And what that will do is, for businesses, it gives them some sort of stability and certainty. So last year, I'm sure people would have heard of situations where several airlines could not take money out of the economy, could not repatriate money to their parent companies because there was just a scarcity, right? And that's because the central bank tends to, keep an artificial rate, a rate that is not sustainable. So they are unable to fulfill obligations at that rate. They're unable to give people dollars at that rate just because it's so low and there's not enough dollars to go around. So if you basically free the peg, two things happen, right? Investors, and that's another thing is investors are unsure whether to come in with their dollars, because we don't want a situation where you come in to do business in the country, and when it's time to repatriate, they're telling you there's no dollar. And it's almost like, but when I was coming in, you didn't tell me that there was no problem bringing in my dollars, right? So if, the official rate is cost reflective, people are sure of what to, they're sure that no matter what, all that will change is the price. But if I need to take my dollars out today, I can take my dollars out. That creates stability. And with that stability, we'll see a larger inflow of investments, larger inflow of, dollars and things like that. So into the country, if people are bringing in dollars, it would not affect, would have more supply of dollars, and it would reduce the volatility of our exchange rate. So that's one thing that we can do. Reduce, we can't just completely say, we will not mirror what the US does. The entire world is very connected. It's very difficult to not, globally, like I said, it wasn't just Nigeria that was increasing rates because the US was. Every country was experiencing inflation rates that they had never seen before. Nigeria even had it much easier and much better than some other countries. The US was seeing rates they had never seen in 40 years. The UK was seeing rates they had never seen in 41 years. Nigeria was seeing rates that we've not seen in 19 years. So we were I mean, in the grand scheme of things,
we were in a better place.
we're less shocked.
But we are sharp poorer than these other places, and so it's much harder for the people themselves.
Yeah.
Okay, so Sylvanus Aburime from Command Road Ikbaja says, you said the main driver of inflation in Nigeria is that we spend significant portion of our money on food. My question is it different in other countries? If yes, which countries are these?
So in most countries, right, food inflation. So basically, the way countries measure inflation is they first compare inflation. There's the headline inflation, which is everything: food, energy, cost of everything in the economy, and like the rate at which it's growing, right? But then there's also what they call the core inflation, and core inflation is everything but food and energy, because food and energy are typically the most volatile. Food and energy, to a large extent, influence how much inflation changes in any part of the world, really. So food inflation is largely a big part of any country's basket. Food in Nigeria, we don't see energy, play as much. At least before, we didn't used to see energy play as much of a role, because obviously petrol prices are subsidized. Electricity as well was subsidized, still is to some extent, but the electricity tariffs are becoming more reflective of the cost. So we would also start to see that. So in cases where oil prices increase and electricity distribution companies, electricity generation companies have to spend more to generate electricity, we would see those shocking changes more in our inflation, the same way we see food change as our food influence our inflation. So largely across the world, food inflation is a big driver. In some places, energy is more of a driver. So in countries like America, for instance, like last year, one of the reasons why they were seeing such high inflation rates was because oil prices were very, very high, and it was influencing how much their petrol was, how much their gas and things were. So that basically, in those kinds of countries, even in the UK and in the whole of Europe, right, because Russia refused to supply as much gas to Europe, they were seeing a significant energy crisis, and that was what was driving their inflation. In Nigeria, however, we're seeing, because petrol is still largely subsidized, even diesel, right? Diesel last year, diesel really influenced our inflation as well, but not as much as food, because of, food is more widespread, petrol is more widespread. When we remove the subsidy on fuel, we'll see a more widespread reflection of the price changes in energy than we're seeing now.
Okay. All right. Lagos, you can join the conversation on 0700-993-993-993. If you just tuned in, hello to you. Good evening. What lies ahead in 2023? Bemisola Longe from Stears is talking to us about it. This is going to be a series, because they released a huge report on what they think Nigeria will look like in 2023. And, we're going to focus on these conversations for the next few weeks. And like I said when we started the show, this year isn't just about the elections. There are lots of things happening already, and there are lots of things that we can expect. And part of why you come to Hard Facts is so that you can have context on the events behind the headlines. And that's why when Stears got in touch and said, hey, we have this report, I said, okay, well, let's dive into it. And Lagos, you are the perfect person to dive into reports with. We'll talk a bit more about Nigeria in 2023 from Stears with Bemisola Longe, who is a senior development analyst at Stears, when we come back from this break. I'm Sandra Ezekwesili. You're listening to Hard Facts on 99.3 Nigeria Info.
99.3 Nigeria Info. We'll be right back.
Please listen to this public service announcement.
It's Alexander Liverpool are majestic. You can't coach against this. City have to defend for 6 minutes. They do not want to attack this. Felon Mendy across into the penalty area, headed down by the Madrid players. Still Madrid hovering around City's penalty box. A chance could come for them. It's 1-1 on the night. It's 4-5 for Navigates. There it comes. It's 2-2. They are back.
Incredible. One of the great nights as a radio football commentator, certainly. Was special. It was special. You could sense it. I literally could sense a potential comeback, and I wasn't surprised that it happened. But you know how I was still able to articulate my words after that goal came in, something magical. So one of those great nights.
Thanks, Alexander
Liverpool are majestic. You can't coach against this.
I'm a sucker for Trent. You know, if he wasn't a Liverpool player, I would wear a jersey with Trent at the back. That was special. There was a free kick from about 38, 40 yards against Chelsea, a team I somehow don't fancy. It was special, and I fell off the seat. It's a classic. I don't think any commentator has been able to do that.
Every day is a new experience for me here. And look, see how excited I was coming into this studio. It was like a kid in a candy shop. What I enjoy doing the most here, let me put it in my own words, is Dear Bumi, because it's relaxing, it's hilarious. And of course, I for the life of me, I would never miss doing programs with Sheriff in the morning. It's one of the best, that's what keeps me alive and going. I think the one that I would remember the most, believe you me, is the one I did with Made Kuti, Femi's son. Every time I looked at, every time I think of the young guy, I feel so inspired because I'm always thinking of tomorrow. I'm youth driven. I'm not saying I'm a youth. Oh, the best thing about being a radio show host is when people hold your hand in public, they pray for you, they send you messages and appreciate what you're doing. Because it's, apart from it being a big job, it's a sacrifice. If you want to do this job well, it is a big, big sacrifice. I'm not known to be a liar. I'm somebody who, and the reason why I don't lie about certain things is I don't want to be caught out. Okay, so if I overslept, you hear me on radio saying, sorry I came late, I overslept. I don't want anybody telling me that this is what happened. I'm very conscious of that. So I don't think I ever lied not to be on air. I'd have called ahead to say, because I'm a professional to the core, and you can ask those who work with me. If I can't make it, sometimes I'd call Sharif in the morning and say, Sharif, let me. I'm tired. If I'm tired, I'm tired, So I don't think I've been caught out as such. I can't remember any time.
For lunch, Mom is bringing in the jollof rice, and then...
Hey! John!
Sorry, Mom.
Hello? Can I order some jollof rice to be delivered?
Mama saves the day. Lunch is here.
Mom, I got some Coke too.
Just come and eat, Joe.
Cook up memorable moments because family lunch and an ice cold Coke make a recipe for wonder. Coca-Cola, real wonder.
Christmas with Westgate Life Care, with everyone is fun. Spread the love, oh shed the amp, enjoy this Christmas. Westgate Life Care more, Westgate Life Care Lounge, Westgate Restaurant. Christmas with Westgate, oh.
Yes, spread the love. Enjoy this festive season with friends and family at Westgate Life Care Mall, Westgate Life Care Supermarket, Pharmacy, Grocery, Bakery, and enjoy our yummy ice cream. Westgate Life Care Supermarket is always open from 6 a.m. to 12 midnight, Mondays to Sundays, 18 hours straight. Visit us today at number 1 Apostolic Street, behind Omole Phase 2, Olowura, Bega, or visit our website, westgatelifecare.com.ng. For more inquiries, please call 0703 745 0669. Westgate Life Care. Top quality. Fabulous savings.
Spread the love, oh shed the amp, enjoy this Christmas.
I got stretch marks in my teens, so of course, when I became pregnant, I wanted to avoid them. I'd hear about bio oil all the time, so it was the obvious choice.
Bio Oil helps improve the appearance of scars, stretch marks, and uneven skin tone. Bio Oil is available in all leading pharmacies and shops and is available online on Jumia. To identify genuine Bio Oil products, look out for the Sproxil, scratch and text PIN, and be instantly rewarded with airtime. Bio Oil Skincare Oil is clinically proven as safe for its intended use by adults, including pregnant women. In the unlikely event of skin irritation, please discontinue use.
Growing up can be confusing, and everybody tells you what to do with your life. Nobody really knows what you're going through. They don't get why you tricked your friend or why you even stole from a notorious kingpin. They're just quick to judge. If only they knew what the true story is. I am Shia, and I want to tell you my story.
Watch Far From Home on Netflix, 16th December. Nollywood is home.
We're back.
We're back.
We're back.
We're back.
We are back.
We're back on 99.3 Nigeria Info.
I'm Sandra Ezekwesili. What lies ahead in 2023? That's a question on my mind after reading the Stears report titled Nigeria in 2023. I've got the senior development analyst on the show with me. She co-wrote the Nigeria in 2023 report. Her name is Gbemisola Alonge, and we've been talking about what exactly lies ahead for us in 2023. We've talked about what will drive inflation in 2023. She told us spikes in food prices, CBN's monetary policy, government spending, consumer expectation of higher prices, as well as the upcoming elections. And she also told us that she expects, of course, without being a prophet, expects according to all of the predictions by the the different institutions who predict these things all over the world, that inflation, could rise speedily this year instead of slow down. Gbemisola also talked about the CBN's policies. We stayed on the ways and means advances for a bit there before we went off on that break. We took a number of questions from you as well. You wanted to know why we spend all that money on food. You wanted to know why we make our Nigerian, why our Nigerian inflation, is often affected by American monetary policy. Gbemisola, in your report, you also talked about how the campaign season will fuel inflation. You talked a bit about it before the break. Get into a bit more detail here. How exactly will the campaign season fuel inflation?
Okay. I guess the first thing that I will note is, obviously elections are in less than 50 days. The presidential election at least. And obviously at this point, parties will be, trying as much as possible to get the names of their parties top of mind for most Nigerians. So that requires a lot of spending, and everything from printing posters to transporting their candidates around the country to campaign, and mobilizing their delegates across the country to campaign on their behalf and things like that. So there's a lot that would go into spending money, and we know that there are many parties, of course, but like the two very common parties that have ruled in the past are very, very buoyant, right? So these are parties that, their membership, their nomination forms go to as high as, tens of millions of naira per candidate, or, so that requires, there's a lot that goes into even, getting top of mind or getting to the front of the nomination basket or nomination drive within each party, and that informs. So what that just basically says to us is a lot of people would be spent, like these parties have a lot of money. I think, I was even going to say for the party nomination, I think APC's nomination went to about 30 billion this year in nomination funds. So these are parties that clearly have a lot of money to throw around.
Mhm.
So they will definitely be doing a lot of spending this year. They already started last year, and then towards the elections, they'll be doing a lot of spending to ensure that they create more awareness for their people, to Nigerians about their parties, and ahead of the elections. Towards when the party actually gets in, this another thing to notice, the Buhari government at the moment passed Nigeria's largest budget ever. Sometime last year, and then this budget is what the next administration would use, at least for the first half of their reign, which is from June to the end of the year. So there's already a lot of money, even in the government's purview, to spend as well. There's a lot of things that they need to do, from swearing in and all that. And that's already, accounted for in the budget. So apart from the fact that the parties that these people belong to are spending money, even the government itself will be spending a lot of money this year, going by the budget figures.
Right. And that's a budget that whoever wins, is going to have to use.
Yes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Okay. How will it affect businesses and consumers in 2023, though? Inflation.
Yeah. So, we already know that prices will be rising. So businesses are bound to first. I guess businesses are not immune. Yes, they're the ones that their prices are the ones that we consumers are feeling the impact of the price increases from. So, for instance, you go to the market and you want to buy, let's say, a pack of milk or a tuber of yam or whatever. The prices are already high, and they will probably increase as well. So when these businesses, on the flip side, are facing a significant increase in their own cost of production. So in the first 9 months of 2022, for instance, Nestle recorded a 35% rise in their cost of production. This was, partly due to the rise in the price of diesel and some other things, right? So even these businesses are feeling the impact in terms of how much they have to now spend to do the same business they've been doing for a while, how much they have to spend to produce their goods, how much they have to spend these goods across the country and across Nigeria. That is some impact of such increase in cost. They then pass on the prices, or the increase in cost to consumers in terms of higher prices. For goods that Nigerians cannot do without, things like food, right? Businesses will successfully pass down these price increases to their consumers. Although sometimes they do it in terms of reducing the SKUs of the units of their product. So let's say you used to buy something, a pack of milk for that was 500 grams before. They might reduce it to 150 grams, but sort of change the price in such a way that you might not notice that you're actually paying more. So that's one very common way that businesses sort of deal with price increases. Another way is just in terms of just increasing their prices. If they know that this is a good that Nigerians cannot do without, this is something that Nigerians have to buy, they will just increase their prices, and there's really not much that Nigerians can do about it. They might reduce how much they consume, but it wouldn't really change much, because the price increases will still be felt. So these businesses, on the one hand, businesses that are in these sectors, like the food and beverage sector, would still continue to do their business, maybe not as well as before, because there's only so much the Nigerian consumer can take. But other companies that dealing things that people can do without might not be so lucky. Those ones might not be lucky enough to pass on the price increases as quickly to consumers.
I've got a message here on WhatsApp. It says, if it is all loom and gloom, I think he means doom and gloom, as painted by Gbemisola in the studio, what will become the lot of Nigerians when the fuel subsidy is eventually removed, as is being hinted by the major frontrunners in the forthcoming elections?
I'm not sure how to make you feel better. If anything, we're all in this together.
Abby?
But yes, indeed. It's not going to be, how do I put this in a nice way? the prices are going to increase. Everyone is going to feel the impact. But the thing is, I feel like because prices have already been increasing steadily, even fuel prices, right? The fuel prices at the pump have increased slightly from last year.
Okay.
And I mean, so even people, I mean, with the scarcity that we faced like towards the end of last year and even up until now, the prices have sort of been like inching upwards slightly. So I feel like Nigerians are almost like
we're already there.
We're not there yet because it's still going to increase significantly.
It's gonna, but like our tolerance, it's like when you're treating for like a disease and you don't finish like the full course of the treatment, and so your body starts to build resistance, small. We've got Fendi on Twitter who says, in my opinion, we are over dependent on consumption and on consumption of imported goods and services. That's one of the reasons why inflation is soaring and the forex rates are fluctuating. We need to at some point start thinking production more. Gbemisola, Nigerians really have a love-hate relationship with importation. They think importation is Baba Yaga. They think importation is the bad guy. Is importation the bad guy, Gbemisola?
I mean, importation is not the main reason why we're where we are today. Frankly, it's not a primary reason. There's so many other things. Importation, yes, it increases the price of goods and services. But what this administration has done, what the Buhari administration has done in the past 7 years, is to sort of make importation as unattractive as possible. And they did this by closing the land borders, by increasing tariffs on a lot of goods, by restricting the CBN restricting foreign exchange from official sources for importation of things like food and some other things, right? So that has made importation very unattractive for Nigerians.
And yet there's still insane inflation.
Yeah, so importation is not a primary reason. Importation is also not even the reason why exchange rate is high. The reason why exchange rate is high, I mean, importation isn't the reason why the NNPC did not remit dollars to the central bank last year, right? And if the NNPC doesn't remit, the NNPC, I mean, all exports are significant or are the primary source of foreign exchange for Nigeria.
Yeah.
But last year, as a result of our low production, the NNPC did not give the central bank dollars. So if the primary source of foreign exchange did not remit foreign exchange to the central bank last year, and that has nothing to do with our importation.
Right.
I mean, there was no dollars to even, right? So the CBN did not get enough dollars to even do around on importation. So I feel like whenever we think about these things, sometimes, I mean, it's very easy to say, oh, we're importing so much, that's why we're where we are today. That's a very easy route to follow. But then importation is not the reason why oil production reduced to less than 1 million barrels per day for the first time ever last year. That's not so it's not the primary reason for Nigeria's problems. Far from it.
And I mean, you do have nations that import far more than we do,
exactly.
In other parts of the world, and they're not facing the same things we are. I've had economists on this show who will say the problem is not imports, it's exports. What we're exporting isn't diversified enough. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, CBN has come up quite a bit in the conversation I've been having with you this evening. Do they have tools that could combat inflation realistically?
Yeah, actually. One of the tools is to stop funding the federal government.
To stop funding the federal government.
So, yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, Nigerians have no idea how bad the situation is, and I feel like we're going to see. So we're going to see this year. If the Ways and Means financing is successfully securitized, we'll see that. We'll see our debt increase according to the DMO to about 77 trillion naira. Like, I can't even wrap my head around how
that amount of debt is.
Yeah, it's quite a lot. It's a lot. Right now, we're doing like 40-something for something trillion naira, and even that in itself is an alarming rate, right? And they were still going 77 trillion because of how much the CBN has funded. And basically what this does is it just it injects a lot of money into the economy in a country where there's so much inequality. So the people who get a hold of this money then pump it, and then even the World Bank in its report last year had cautioned the CBN as well, apart from funding the federal government, from providing money to development initiatives, right? So things like Anchor Borrowers Program and all that. So according to the World
Bank, because that's not the CBN's job.
Exactly. That's number one, it's not the CBN's job. And number two, it hasn't even translated to commensurate benefits. So it's harming us way more than it's helping
benefiting us,
the economy. Right. So these are the different things that first the CBN, and these are not policies that the CBN will come out and implement, or like in an MPC meeting, they won't come out and read this as, the final decision. There are things that the CBN has to do from today. You don't need to wait to an MPC meeting where you increase interest rates and all that. From today, like taking precautions. But and even the National Assembly, I was on a Twitter space some days ago where, we admitted that everybody that has contributed to the federal government borrowing so much from the CBN needs to be called to book. The National Assembly has continuously passed budgets that the government cannot fund. They know every single time that this budget comes to their table, they know that it is impossible for the government to actually meet the revenue expectations that is set in the books. Yet, they continue approving the budget. And what that then does is the government still has to fall back and then borrow from the CBN. And okay, let's even imagine that they expected, no one's expecting Nigeria to, for instance, in 2020, no one expected the economy to go as bad as it did. Let's imagine that, there is situations beyond our control, right? When that happens, ideally, what the Senate should do the next year is ensure that all the amounts or all the ways and means financing that has been funded by the central bank in the past must be paid for before another significant borrowing is done. But then that hasn't happened. The CBN has been funding the federal government. No one has been punished or penalized for it. Everyone goes about their business as usual. People are still getting paid and people are still getting promoted. Everything is still going on as usual. But that should not be the case. Like, there's no one sounding the alarm at those levels. Punishing honestly, people should be punished for these things, because these are like crimes against Nigerians, and nothing has been done about that. So once the CBN starts to make these moves, indeed, there'll be some progress in solving the inflation problem.
I've got Anthony here who says the inflation rate of the economy is influenced mainly by the closure of the border, Russia-Ukraine war, and COVID-19. What do you say, Gbemisola?
I mean, those are contributing factors.
Okay.
The closure of the border, yes, in 2019 was a big trigger for Nigeria's inflation. But then the borders have been open for a while now.
But you have those who continue to report that they haven't actually been opened.
I mean, so whether or not, I mean, it's very possible that what's on ground is very different from what the president has announced. But at least the president had announced that, all the borders should be
reopened, yeah.
But beyond that, right, and yes, indeed, like the Russia-Ukraine war influenced, inflation significantly, because, I mean, Russia and Ukraine are major food suppliers in the world. But then, if you look at Nigeria's situation, particularly, food inflation has been something that has been triggering like inflation for the longest time, right? So I'm not discounting that these factors are not, I mean, COVID-19, yes, indeed, it influenced the supply chain situation across the world. And that also, I mean, Nigeria was also affected by it. I'm not discounting these things. They're indeed contributing factors to the inflation, but we also have very domestic influences that are peculiar to Nigeria, and Nigeria has control over. Things like our structural, situations, moving food across the country, the CBN's policies, those are things we can control. And once we actually start to move those needles, like everyone reporting on Nigeria, the World Bank, the IMF, everybody would make, has pointed out these issues. And I mean, when you look at it, right, an example I gave was just the informal taxes that people have to pay, moving goods from one part of the country to the other. That's not something, even if Russia and Ukraine make peace today and global prices of food reduce today, that's not something that would reduce for Nigeria. It wouldn't change, right? These are issues that are still critical, and like they could easily trigger. I mean, even the flooding situation, right? We saw last year, I mean, food producing communities were literally
really
submerged in
affected.
water.
Exactly.
So these are things that have nothing to do with the Russia-Ukraine war or COVID or even the border closure, right? But these are things that, I mean, all these issues are contributing factors, including the external issues. But I'm focusing more on those that we have control over. And change.
Okay. Well, Gbemisola Longe is a senior development analyst at Stears, and she'll be back, or someone else from Stears will be back to take a deeper look into Nigeria in 2023, a report put together by Stears. Gbemisola, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Sandra.
Lagos, stick around. We'll bring you the news at 6. And after the news at 6, I've got a story to share with you on today's Step Down. A woman says her traditional marriage is coming up this month. Her husband-to-be is insisting that she must wear the same clothes with his mother because he doesn't want his mother to feel bad that her clothes are expensive and finer than those of his mother. He loves his mother too much, and so she has to wear the same clothes that his mother will wear for their traditional marriage. And I wonder what you think about that. We'll have that conversation after the news at 6 o'clock. So from 6:15 until 6:30, let's talk about this little story on the Step Down. On the Step Down, we let our hair down and we get a bit more personal. And there's nothing more personal than weddings. I'm Sandra Ezekwesili. This is Hard Facts on 99.3. The news is up next. Don't go away.